Hello, and welcome to Movies We Dig, the podcast about film, antiquity, and everything in between. I'm Colin McCormick.
I'm Elijah Fleming.
And I'm Christy Vogler.
And today we're digging into part 2 of I, Claudius, the 1976 BBC television series adapted by the novels by Robert Graves, written by Jack Pullman, and starring Derek Jacobi, Sean Phillips, Brian Blessed, John Hurt, and many other famous British actors. But before we get into that, we have an update from Christy, a la the current state of the brackets.
Yes, the current state is Christy wins the wine. Huzzah!
I'm so mad.
I know. So Elijah and I went up in the first semifinal match. Our dark horses, not dark, I guess our horses in general, went up against each other.
Medium horses.
Yeah. And Life of Brian came out on top. Did you like my mashup I did for the announcement?
Yes.
I was so proud of that.
Yes, I did. That was a good mashup. I'm just still peeved. I'm like, come on, guys. Like Spartacus, come on.
Yeah, it's a bummer.
So, and then we are currently in the middle, coming towards the end of the other semifinal match, which is between Gladiator and Fellini Satyricon. So I think we all know how that's going to go.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that the final match.
Upsets happen, but.
Like, Agra almost upset Gladiator.
Really?
That would have been wild.
It was close. I know, it was close. I was really hoping Agra was going to come out on top.
That's got to be all just like classics nerds who are like
Oh,
all of the like
100%.
secret scans for Agra.
I'm pretty sure that's all who's voting in this.
Fair enough. That's also probably true.
And then, so it's likely going to be a matchup between Life of Brian versus Gladiator. So
wild,
it will be interesting to see how that turns out. And then, of course, for the lovable losers category, Pompeii, solid showing throughout. Kit Harington has made his way into the finals, and then the semifinal match for worst movies right now. It's the X-Men. If you remember that from Horrible Histories, we have the Eagle versus Centurion fighting it out. Right.
The other day, a student was in office hours with one of my office mates and asked about the Eagle of the Ninth, and I almost had like a desk flip moment. We're like, I'm sick of hearing about this goddamn Ninth Legion. I don't care. I don't care what happened to them. I'm tired. It's not interesting. Probably nothing.
So if you're reporting on an event of doom in Roman history, it dooms your film, apparently, is what we've come to learn through this contest.
Well, that seems fine.
Yeah, I'm still like really hoping Centurion takes it all. But to be fair, I haven't seen Pompeii, so
you should probably watch it.
You should probably watch it.
I need to watch it.
In the way
especially
that,
I know that you went there last summer, not this summer,
I
but last
did.
summer.
It's
So like
so fun.
I think you should watch it. Yeah.
it's not like there's any sort of resemblance between
Pompeii
and the film and the Pompeii.
No.
Really.
I'm just saying, like, having just been there, you will see how ridiculous it is.
Yes. If you guys ever revisit movies from season 1 to watch again,
I was actually thinking there are some that we should probably.
That. Yeah,
we've floated that idea around that we maybe need to bring out. We need to bring Troy and 300 and Alexander back out into the mix.
For sure.
Okay, Alexander.
Give it like now that we've maybe for like an anniversary thing or something like that when we hit like a benchmark. Let's go back to our.
That'd be fun.
Because that's going to come up faster than we realize. I think.
Very true. Yeah.
But should we talk about the show?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what did you? I'm curious now that you've seen the thing to completion, Eli and Christy. Do you dig I, Claudius?
Yes and no. Which is the worst answer. I really see the appeal. Like, I understand its gravitas, its pull, this huge space that it takes up. That's very, very clear. And like the performances are really, really fun. I think I personally just had a hard time getting past the 1970s of it all and the bad prosthetics and the wigs and it. I
was watching the interview where and they had all the actors and they were talking about it and Sean Phillips was very diplomatic where she was like it was the best available at the time and it was good for the time, and then they cut immediately to Brian Blessed, who said I never really made my peace with the makeup in that show. And then a lot of them talked to him just because they all had to wear like these prosthetics, basically like face stuff and nose stuff, because a lot of them had to go like Tiberius has to be at one point in the show like 20 something years old and then like 80 something years old by the end of it.
Yeah.
And so they have a lot of very goofy kind of hair and makeup. Apparently it took 5 hours to get Sean Phillips into the old Livia makeup and things like that. But
oh my gosh. Yeah. So I loved a lot of it, but I think that part of it really took me out of the story. And it felt much more like a stage production, like a play, which is not, necessarily a bad thing. It's a certain type of storytelling. And I liked a lot of it for what it was. And I feel like, with modern prosthetics, with modern makeup, I feel like even today they would have just had different actors to play these characters. If you have somebody supposed to be 20 and 80, I feel like it's rare that you would use the same person unless you like very much CGI'd the hell out of them.
Well, and originally Claudius was, I think, supposed to be more than one person and split up over.
Technically, he is. There's a child version. And then,
yes,
sure.
Yeah, but there was going to be, and then they settled on Derek Jacobi being able to play that he could be like simultaneously, in his 30s and then in his 60s and then in his however old he is at the end.
Yeah. And I think I'm on the same page as Lige that I was surprised at how delightful I found this a lot of the time. Like, I felt immensely invested in a lot of the characters, which was really great because you could tell, again, we talked about this last time, but like the limited budget and everything like that. But I was definitely getting more frustrated with the second half. There's parts of it I still really liked, but especially... Well, like with a lot of the characters, it's like it really was picking the most salacious versions of these people to tell this story. It's like Livia, I can understand that depiction. Livilla, I can understand that depiction. We're going to talk about Messalina.
Yeah, we are.
No, just no. I draw the line, and Messalina is the line of you've just picked up rumors and put it into a single character that makes no sense. So I think that's where some of my frustration is that some characters were developed so well, but they really were just trying to show them just the most salacious view of them. And I think that's what I disliked because it was so focused on the family. Like that was interesting, but like Rome, the show is like, it was a great balance of those in power and those not in power and how much they relied on each other. And this was just all like, who's following these people? Because they look nuts.
I mean, we should talk about Messalina, particularly compared to Livia, but that question really is brought into focus with Caligula, where when Caligula first kind of comes into power, Claudius is originally like, well, this is great because everybody's, nobody's going to tolerate this. He's an insane man. It's the like, well, like how bad could it be? And then,
ooh boy.
But yeah, and you mentioned, but like John Hurt's performance in this is probably one of the most
absolutely
standout things happening. And I had forgotten about the scene, but like I was just rolling in my chair when the scene where they drag Claudius and some other senators out of their homes in the middle of the night and they make them wait in a room. Yes. And then they think they're just going to get executed. And then the lights come on and it's this insane dance that he does about the dawn. And I was like, never in 1,000 years was like this the direction I thought this was going to go. But
I think because I had been binging it. And so like, I like kind of like awoke in that moment all of a sudden. I'm like, wait, what's happening?
I was kind of like, because I will put this show on sort of in the background, turn the volume way up, and then go around and like make dinner and stuff, and then just kind of, and then that happened. I was like, oh, I could like rewind. I gotta watch this again.
So good. Do we have like any like little? Should we do like a little recap of the second half?
Yeah,
to kind of create our structure.
Yeah. Can I give my stupid little TLDW?
Please.
Yeah. That basically, did this Julio Claudian die from poison, medical malpractice, or being on the wrong end of a sword?
Yeah. Great question.
Yeah. My kind of thesis, particularly for the second half of the show, is that there's no stopping this train, so you might as well get on board.
Yes. Yeah. That tracks. No, in my head, because we split this up into like the first half and the second half, I like thought of it as like a first season and a second season, which doesn't like necessarily work, but it's how my brain thought about it.
It's kind of like Livia, Without Livia.
It's a pre and post Livia kind of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. And so in the world post Livia is a lot of like stupid people get to do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that seems to be like the fallout of Livia not killing all the stupid people. I guess that would be her opinion, right? But like, so the structure of it follows kind of the bare structure of history is what Robert Graves did in the novels is, Caligula comes to power and there's a brief moment where everybody thinks maybe this will work really well. And it descends rapidly when he declares himself a living god, which is not a thing that Romans do at this time period, at least. Everybody kind of has to fall in line to save their own, careers and their own lives and their families' lives. Eventually, that is too much to bear, and the Praetorian Guard orchestrates his death and orchestrates naming Claudius emperor. And then the rest of the season, the rest of the miniseries is Claudius dealing with that position and the pushes and pulls and the manipulations of his friends, his wives, and the people around him, eventually to his death.
Yeah. Just to add a little caveat to that, he's also being guided by the Sibylline book that only he and Livia knows about to bring about the rise of Nero.
Yes.
And he tries to save his son, Britannicus, and like, I don't know, maybe you'll win against fate. But it's like, you know what? I'm about to die, so who cares?
This always, we run into this problem sometimes with the like historical reimaginings. And we talked a little bit about this with Marcus Aurelius and right, where you want to like recapture this person and maybe revitalize them or resuscitate them or something like that. But you then have to kind of deal with the real life decisions that they made that were somewhat questionable, naming Nero or letting Commodus exist.
Yeah.
So this feels like, like the show has to like think of a reason where like, all right, if Claudius was so smart and high-minded, then like how the hell did he ever let Nero happen?
Yeah, I sort of thought it was going the direction of what they thought about Caligula. It was like, this guy is so awful and terrible that we'll have to revert to a republic, right? Like that's, I feel like that was the thinking at the end of Claudius, right?
He's when he like sets up Britannicus.
To like come back. And I really thought they were going to do a whole thing of like Britannicus leaves and hides out in Britain. And then he's the one who like is supposed to come back. And I don't know. There's weird Britain ties because it's so
he
British.
marries Boudica
and something crazy along those lines.
But then we get the sort of the consolation prize. It's like, well, there will still be emperors, but they'll for the most part be competent for the next century
Which is like
or so.
Super questionable, right? Like depends on who you ask. Also, like the next year is not going to be great. So
Nope.
I feel like this was made for history nerds, right? Like this was made for people who could say, I see that, or I remember that. I remember reading that, or I know what's going to happen next.
Who like hold out their Roman textbook
Christy's
to be like,
holding up
okay.
a textbook of Roman history. I just simultaneously have like 30 Wikipedia tabs open at any given time while I'm watching the show.
I had that too. I'm just like,
I had like 5 different family trees going at the same time.
And it makes you ask you like, like, all right, well, like a character will come on and be like, all right, like hang on, what's going on with this person? Like, do I have to look them up? Like, what's happening? Why are they significant? Like, whatever happened to them? That kind of thing.
Yeah. That was kind of a question I wanted to go into is like, why do you guys think the series and the book that it was based on, why did they choose Claudius as the narrator?
I have a fun story before I seriously entertain the question, which is according to Robert Graves in an interview, he had moved to Majorca and basically he needed to come up with like 4,000 pounds to like pay off his house. And made a mental note where basically he had been reading Suetonius and he said something like, the way he phrased it in the interview I saw was that it was like, basically he was reading Suetonius and Tacitus and he was like, there's something missing about Claudius. If ever I need the money, I'll write whatever that missing. There's some secret here. So the way, at least as he tells it, is he basically got some headcanon into his brain while he was reading Tacitus and then decided to write on it in order to drum up an extra couple £1,000 to make a down payment on his house in Majorca.
Man, if only.
Right? When I think about that, I'm like, what? I'm doing it wrong. Why am
I?
I know, right?
Should move to Spain and just write a book to pay for the house. Also, the fact that he needed 4,000 pounds for that.
I know, just 4,000.
I can't even touch that. No.
Which admittedly in the 20s was a lot more money, but even still.
Yeah. I always thought that it was because Claudius was technically the first Roman emperor to like conquer Britain. And so it's like,
that would make sense.
He even talks about like, since Julius Caesar, I'm the first Roman emperor who's actually like brought Britain back into the fold of the empire. And I can only imagine that that has a special place in any British historian's heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's the sort of baked in appeal of the idea of like Claudia, he is kind of an underdog story. At least you can imagine as such, right? He's the one that everybody thought was an idiot. He had an impediment. He was mocked and derided by everybody around him, including his own family. And then he rises to power. And then, it is that kind of, it is the fantasy, right? Of like, everybody's going to realize how smart I am.
Yeah.
He's also just very uniquely placed, right? Like he got to know Augustus to a certain extent, knew Augustus, knew Livia, and then he knew Nero. Like he kind of was one of the only, this is one of my favorite scenes, was like, everyone who had all their wits are now dead.
Yeah.
And me with half my wits.
Yeah, he was a witness.
Still here. So
at least from what we understand, I think in Tacitus, he had a relatively, prior to him being emperor, he had pretty much no political career. Or a small one, at least. He wasn't very prominent. He was kind of like a fly on the wall for like this whole thing. He just witnesses all of this stuff happen and then manages to outlive it all and then ends up as the emperor by sort of sheer dumb luck. But then also, the show and the book kind of instills in Claudius maybe nobler sentiments than he might have had.
Sure.
To, again, explain things like Nero and Agrippinilla, probably other decisions he made as emperor.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it worked. Like I thought it was interesting because the next series we're going to look at is specifically from Livia's perspective, right? So
yeah, in preparation for this episode, I had gone back and I reread some of the Suetonius. So I read Augustus and I read Claudius. Suetonius is not. It's very interesting. You get this in Suetonius. You get this kind of like bifurcation where in some ways he seems like very smart, where he's incredibly involved in like judicial matters, like he presided, but in other times he seems like kind of a little sort of scatterbrained.
Right.
Suetonius is a little more sort of split on him, but we know he did write histories. My favorite Claudius fact was he invented 3 new letters.
Nice.
Of course he did. Of course.
For one is basically, this is the rabbit hole I went down, but one is basically like a ps sound, like a psi in Greek. It's for basically like scripsit or something like that. It's for like a PS or a BS. One was basically like a digamma, so it's like a W sound to differentiate between like consonantal V and vowel V.
Yeah.
And then one was...
It's very German, right? It's like Proto-German in so many ways.
That makes sense.
One's like a half H, and it's unclear exactly what that sound... These letters are only... They didn't last, but there are a handful of inscriptions out there with these letters in them.
Oh, that's so
during
cool.
Claudius's reign. And my other favorite thing I realized as I was reading about it is that so the shapes for the letters, one's basically like an upside down F, one is basically like a backward C, and one is basically like half of an H. And those forms were probably chosen because you would have already had the stencils for those letters already, basically. It's just like a modification of a existing. You don't have to like create a new... For like people who have to like carve stone and stuff like that. They don't have to like create new templates. They could all you got to do is like flip the F around.
Oh, that's really fun.
Yeah, and he did write a history about Etruscans and a history about Carthage. So he seemed to have been, I don't know, no one's ever read these to talk about it. So who knows how good they were, but...
Livia had thoughts, and they were not good thoughts.
Supposedly he was also pretty competent in Greek as well, which is something I also learned from Suetonius. Augustus never was.
Huh.
Well, that's kind of funny. Yeah, that actually works. I see that. I think there's so much like court intrigue that I feel like I expect to be from like a different time. Like I almost expect all of the court intrigue to be like medieval or Renaissance-y. And I don't know if that's like a British influence from Robert Graves or just like I don't expect that from a Roman setting. But it's very like royal family, people poisoning each other, like court politics. And I think it's a funky place. And it feels like fresh and new and fun.
It feels like a Shakespeare that never existed or something like that. It feels like a Shakespeare play, but it's not actually a Shakespeare play.
Yes.
And I can't help but sort of read this. It's hard for me to kind of put myself back in and just think about the show just in its own context and in and of itself, because I always want to read it against what I know is coming down the pipe. Your HBO Rome's and your Game of Thrones. And I can't help but just sort of see how this is laying a lot of the track
Definitely.
Both in the sort of the kinds of plots and the kinds of characters, right? That it's going to be long form, spanning sort of many, many years, have all these different characters, the kind of political intrigue, the sex and violence and death of it all.
Yep.
The tropes, right? Like Claudius he's very much kind of like a Tyrion Lannister kind of character. Yep. George Martin has been very explicit that his Stannis Baratheon is just modeled on George Baker in this show.
Yeah.
As Tiberius. And even just like the way this was also like a show that it was wildly popular, and it sort of became like a monoculture in a way that I feel like Game of Thrones was kind of the last thing, and maybe will be the last thing for a while, where it's like everybody watched it and would talk about it the next day, right? And like engage with it. It became this like cultural landmark that was shared among everybody.
I feel like Succession was like that too, to an extent, but I have not watched that.
I mean, Succession, same, or the Falls of Usher, like these and maybe it's just an evergreen subject, but watching the rich and powerful destroy themselves through their own machinations.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Which
brings me about that.
this was like the big question in my head, and it goes back to the kind of like critique and unease I had about this is like, what do we think of presenting the Julio-Claudians as a soap opera? Like, wealthy people do some crazy and abhorrent things. Like, we've heard of, Jeffrey Epstein and the kinds of things that he was pulling off, the Playboy Bunny Mansion and things like that. So it's like, on the one hand, I'm watching some of these stories and I'm just like, there's no way, no normal person does this, but this is the family of the emperor.
And not normal people.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you guys think of that?
Every time you read a story about some celebrity or powerful politician or something is doing like something that is just like god awfully abhorrent, and you're just like, how do you find yourself in a position where you're like going down this road? And I'm like, just something happened, right? When you get that kind of wealth and power and fame status where like your brain just realigns like what is moral or something. I don't know, like maybe it does. I have no clue. There's kind of maybe like a Freudian read where it's like, everybody has these like dark, sinister thoughts that live inside, but the Julio-Claudians like get to act upon them because like who's going to stop them, right?
Yeah.
That's a pessimistic reading, maybe.
Yeah, but there's something to be said about that reading, though, because I feel like it plays out, unfortunately, right?
Right. When you,
Yeah. Well, it seems to be tied to this idea of like, I was rereading the synopsis for like Squid Games, and just like the whole premise for these things is like a bunch of rich people get together and they're bored, so they come up with something truly awful, and it's just like, is it like everyone gets bored but rich people have enough money to figure out new ways to not be bored?
Well, I mean, maybe that could take us into talking about Messalina, because isn't her whole thing is like, I'm bored, right?
Yeah.
Or should we talk about Caligula first? I don't know. We could go chronologically.
Let's go through the shows. Let's go Caligula, then we get Messalina, because I have a lot of thoughts about Messalina. But because Caligula, I mean, so my headcanon as I was watching this show, this is completely my own sort of just interpretation, not supported by anything in the text or the either text. This man has a brain tumor. Yeah. He has these constant migraines, or, the galloping he hears in his head. His obsession with divinity goes back to a young age. And and just no sense of morality. I don't know actually what else to add about him.
Yeah, I thought that it was like mini seizures, because he has this like repetition. So it's like either mini strokes or mini seizures that he's going through, this like buildup of something in his brain, and then he like goes back to the beginning. Because you have him like having the same conversations over and over. And I think like delusions of grandeur is like one of those things that comes with well, like usually it's like advanced age or like dementia or Alzheimer's can have that as well. But mini strokes, mini seizures can also do that as well. So that's kind of how I read it. But there's something going on.
Well, and the metamorphoses too, possibly being the result of a grand mal seizure or something.
Yeah.
I think it's in Tacitus where it kind of frames Caligula, where like the first couple of years are like actually seemingly fine, and then he gets really ill for a little bit, and then when he comes back, that's when everything kind of just goes nuts.
Which is interesting to think about, right? Like between Julio-Claudians, like Livia just doing stuff because of goals, empire goals, versus these individuals. Like that's what's really kind of fascinating about Caligula and Claudius too, is like these are individuals that would often be ostracized,
definitely,
but because they're in a position of power, everyone has to kind of like cater, it's an interesting comparison probably to Dianne Feinstein, right? Like she's still in a position of power when that poor woman should have just been allowed to rest. But like all of these people around her are keeping it going.
Right. And then the system, like the system self-perpetuates. That's like the insidious, which is the thing I like most about this show, of the way it kind of captures, like, because you do have this question, like, okay, well, like, why doesn't Claudius just, he has the power, why doesn't he just reinstate the Republic? And it's because there's 4,000 Praetorian guards who want a paycheck and are ready to burn the city down, basically, if Claudius doesn't. And the way everybody kind of, like, Claudius himself gets swept up in the machine. One of the things I kind of like about Claudius is the kind of nihilistic approach to, like, it doesn't even matter if I'm a good emperor or not.
Yeah.
And no matter how good or bad the emperor is, there's always people that are invested in institutions that are invested in keeping this in place, right? To keep things going.
No, and that was so clear. Yeah, so clear with Caligula. And they're all like bending over backwards to accommodate his absolute insane requests of like holding court in the Temple of Zeus and like, being referred to as, as Zeus himself and marrying his sister. Fighting the ocean and bringing back a bunch of seashells as booty or whatever. Like, that's insane. And everybody recognizes that it's insane. Like, nobody's actually on board, but they're all like, okay, but we need to maintain this for reasons, for political reasons, for stability, for a paycheck, all of that stuff. And it just keeps getting crazier and crazier. And I think one of my favorite Caligula scenes is when he kills, is it Drusilla?
Yeah.
Is that his sister?
I had that on my list too.
I think that might be the gnarliest thing ever put to TV.
Oh, yeah. That was like really, really, really awful. But it's like, it starts off, so like, I don't want to say normal, but like creepy normal, because it's his sister and they're like, alone in the temple. And I was watching this with Nick and he's like, oh, he's not going to kill her. And I'm like, this is
so foreshadowed. So foreshadowed.
I mean, the whole myth, right? Repeat, Zeus got to eat his own children, all that kind of stuff.
Yep. And he
apparently
just slices her open.
When he comes out, I don't know if in the version you guys watch, but when he comes out and he's got blood coming out
on his face.
Yes.
I think that wasn't in the original PBS airing. It was only in Britain they showed that part.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I heard they had to change that a few different times, both after it aired and like...
you're penning that script and you're like, and then he eats his sister's unborn fetus. And you're like, you write that.
Okay.
You're like, whoa, that is the darkest thing ever.
Yes.
But it goes back again to this, like, I have no doubt in my mind that Caligula definitely was struggling with something mental health wise during his reign. But like, even in the show, like they showed a few times when he made some reasonable decisions.
Absolutely.
Like his last wife and like, my textbook, I kept bringing back my textbook. It's like, if it's this bad, just what they're doing to the family is like, what's Rome doing in the meantime? And they're just like, the senators were uneasy about all the assassinations, but everything else was fine.
There's the giant caveat that our major sources for this are written, some decades later by people who absolutely harbor very sort of nostalgic sentiments about life before. Right. So there's always that kind of lens. I was just even the idea like in Tacitus where Caligula's like, it's okay at first and then it gets bad. Like that's a pattern that shows up with like all of the Caesars in his work. And so like at what point is it a thematic trope he's constructing rather than his actual sort of analysis and evidence rooted observations?
Well, and they lean so heavily into like I think Christy, you said this, like the salaciousness of it all, of like they really, really harp on all of the incest and he's sleeping with his sisters. And like they even bring that back later with Agrippinilla. And it's like we're really, really leaning heavily onto like the worst case scenario. Like if all of these horrific things that have been rumored to be true are true, what does that look like? Because we have some weird ass things that were written about Caligula, but I don't know, like half of it true? Is 90% of it true? Is 20% of it true? Like, we don't know.
Right. Which goes back to rich people today, because it's like, I wouldn't believe people capable of half the things that have been confirmed to happen.
I'm reminded, I forget, there was a comedian. They had a bit where they're talking about like at a certain point in like Michael Jackson's life, like he didn't even know if the stories about himself were true or not. And somebody is like asking, he's like, is it true you bought John Merrick's bones? And he's like, I don't know, maybe. It's like, sounds like a thing I do. So like, yeah. And then even to your question about like, what is that like for other people? Like, right, if I live in North Africa or something like that, and I get like, I get updates from Rome, like periodically, you know, and pay some taxes, send some shipments of grain, things like that. But like, you just hear these stories after the fact, and like how much that actually, like how much the decisions of what's going on in the capital radiate outwards, you know, is an open question. I mean, it can matter a lot because it can mean things like, is so-and-so city getting relief or aid when an earthquake hits them? Or right, are they paying tribute or are they not paying tribute? Do they have legal statuses? Can they request X, Y, or Z? But then also for many people, it's also like new guys on the throne. It's just different image in the temple today.
Or a different like face on my money, you know, whatever. Yeah. It's still money. It still works. Don't care.
And then also, it's like, that's the thing. On the periphery, it's like, let's build him a temple. Sounds godlike. I don't know.
Yeah, all right. That's fine.
Yeah.
Like, he says he's God. All right, he's God.
That's
whatever.
Fine.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Like? I don't know. Draw him like one of our gods.
Yeah, it'll work. It'll be fine.
I mean, my hot take as I was watching is like, you know, it might actually be fun to be living during Caligula's reign. Like every day, something new, right? You never know.
Yeah, you got to be on your game. Like you got to be spitting lines like Claudius, saving people's lives.
You got to be ready with like, because literally people's lives depend upon how good you can pull a Homer quote.
Right. Yeah, no, I do think those scenes of just like John Hurt being Caligula, being insane, were so much fun that it left a lot of other things in the dust for me. I wanted so much more of Caligula, even though I was so happy to see him murdered.
And I was watching an interview with Herbert Wise, the director, and he made a point that I thought was good, which is one of the approaches to this show. One of the things that made this show so, I think, endearing, and what makes the show work is how much humor is infused throughout the whole thing. Sure. Like it is sort of in this juxtaposition that is, there are just jokes, but there's also like nominally very hilarious things happening that are also deeply terrifying. And Caligula and like John Hurt has talked about this, and like that is exactly that. Where like what Caligula is saying is goofy as all hell and like laughably silly about like, well, like I was a god, of course, and I woke, but I'm in my mortal form, and like, and I yelled at that river and I told him to shove off, so we won't be hearing from him anymore. Like that's all like kind of hilarious that this guy is this goofy, but then it's also this other thing where like at any moment he might pull a sword out and murder a guy.
Yeah. Well, and I loved the death scene too, because he's like been stabbed and it's like, I can't die, I'm a god. Like you could tell.
I love it. I wrote he would go out like a bitch.
I thought that was interesting because I can't remember who said it. I think it was Drusilla who said, like, you know, he's more scared than any of us. And trying to believe himself to be a god. I think that's something interesting to think about too, right? Because Augustus is one of the first ones to really play with this idea of godhood of, you know, Julius Caesar. And then, you know, that transition slowly happens to, it's like, when I die, I get to be a god and you get to be a god. But the motivation to that in my head has always been this idea of, well, that just gives more authority, right? You're trying to uphold this new institution of the empire. I think it's interesting, and I think Liz last week brought this up, of there was more of a Christian spin on this of like, well, if I'm a god, then I'm not going to end up in hell for my sins.
Yeah, hell is for sinners. I don't want to end up there.
Yeah.
It's like, that didn't jive, but like Caligula, like being scared of the position he's in is like, but if I'm a god, then I'll be okay.
Right.
Yeah. Especially if he has awareness sometimes, because he asks the question of that one series. And I'm like, well, if I'm a god, why didn't I realize that?
Yeah. Why didn't I think of that? Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think for him, it felt more natural in a certain way of like, he wasn't doing it for the authority of his position. He was doing it to just kind of console himself of like his own fears.
Yeah. And like, and come back to like the way he dies, like he's kind of just like a scared little kid.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like he's just playing out his fantasy. Like it is like living under his reign is like being at the whims of a toddler more than anything else.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
We just got to go along with the make believe for a little bit. Otherwise, they're going to kick and scream, and then everybody's life will be miserable.
Yeah.
I did love Claudius's death vision that Caligula goes up. It's like, could you guess I was actually immortal? I know. I actually died.
Could have knocked me over with a feather.
Beautiful touch there. Just to put a bow on it, call it a day for Caligula.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Does that mean Messalina?
Yeah, because now we get the ascension of Claudius, and then via Caligula, he is introduced to his new wife, Messalina. Probably one of our least favorite characters in the series.
Well, it's like, exactly. I don't know. Again, this is like coming from us who are big history nerds who maybe like know this story. When you see this girl and they call her Messalina, you like already know from the moment that she like looks at Claudius, the drama that's going to ensue. Because there's so much baggage that comes along with Messalina. And she starts off like so wonderful, right? And that's her whole thing, is that she's supposed to be awesome and endearing and extremely manipulative. And she calls herself like, I want to be Olivia to your Augustus. And she doesn't play the game right. Like, she doesn't do it. She's not Livia.
No.
in like the most failing of ways, right? Like it doesn't work.
Well, she has
all.
she has no chill, right? Which is the
zero
what
chill.
What Livia had in spades. Because Livia is patient and persistent, whereas Messalina is impulsive and
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Just part of what frustrated with me too, right? And I think there's a conversation when his advisors are telling Claudius who he should marry next, and they say like Messalina, she was clever, like someone who could work with him and take off the load of being an emperor. But then they also called her stupid, and it's she was the one character where it's like, I can't truly believe all of the salacious stuff said about her. I just can't, especially because
no motive, right? Like, she has no real motive other than her, I want to sleep with all of these people. And it's so unrealistic, I feel like, to any, like, Livia, I feel like, is a realistic historical figure as a woman who has designs and ideas that go beyond herself. And Messalina is so focused on just her own, like, next hour of the day that it seems incredibly unrealistic as a historical figure, or as even a character, like, in a novel. That, like, how, why, what? Yeah.
Yeah. So, we talked a little bit about how, Livia may be somewhat the victim of historians after the fact, or writers or authors, imagining stuff onto her. And I think Messalina is really, more than anyone, got really done dirty, where most of what we have from ancient sources are painting this incredibly, like Eli said, so over the top portrait that even for the longest time, most historians, I think, have been like, this can't be, like, this has to be like a hit. This feels like a hit job.
Yeah.
This feels like character assassination. So, like, what's going on there? And then there have been, I think, sort of reimaginings and reclamations of, like, why does she have, that question in and of itself is, why does she have such a horrendous reputation?
Yeah.
Is an interesting question to sort of get into, of, like, what would be motivated? Like, why would I care so much that I got to basically, like, paint her into the queen prostitute of Rome or whatever it is?
And that's not driven by Claudius either, right? Claudius is very reluctant to leave her. That's shown in the show, but historically that is what we're told as well, that basically his advisors underhandedly make sure to get rid of her. And then she's damnatio? Is that right?
Yeah, she gets a damnatio.
So she's almost actively erased, or attempted to be erased from the history completely.
Yeah, and then so we're left with this character, and, like, in this show, Messalina is kind of the one character that feels like it was, like, I feel like an incel's idea of a woman.
Yes.
Where it's like so
100%.
Id-driven, selfish, manipulative, smart, but in only certain ways, and like really dumb in other ways. So, like, outwardly, like, corrupt and craven and sex-driven. And it really does feel like Messalina's biography was, like, written by, like, the incels of Reddit.
Yes, 100%. Yes.
Which is so funny, because we talked about last week how, like, Livia, and I think it's partially Liz pointed out, like, there might be a generational thing where I very much see Livia as, like, kind of a hero, and I kind of stand for her, and I'm with her most of the way, even acknowledging her sins. But in the show itself, in interviews, so Herbert Wise, basically the director, said Sean Phillips was trying to, like, find motivation and reason beyond the character. He was like, no, just play her like straight villain, which is really interesting that was the intent, because that is not how I read it now, even though it's,
not at all.
may have been treated, because I see a lot of I mean, even in her final hours, like a self-awareness and like a rationale that happens with Livia of that can justify these things that she does, right? Everything Livia does makes sense to a degree. And at a certain level, she's not wrong, right? The Republic sucked, or at least how she knew it. The Republic sucked. And you know, we got to keep a steady hand on the tiller. But Messalina like lacks all of that. I mean, which is also maybe just part of the theme of the show of just the degradation, right? As the Julia Claudians go on, everything, not just like things get worse, the crimes get worse, the extravagances get worse, but just like the quality of the character gets worse of like, in the sense of one, that they're like worse people, but also that they're just like, they're not as smart, right? She's not scheming as well as Livia schemed. She's a poor imitation, right?
Yeah. The whole scene of her competing against a prostitute to see who can wear out the most men in a day, which apparently comes from Pliny the Elder, is the one who told that story, supposedly.
I have a lot of questions about the rules of this contest.
So many questions.
But the thing is, it's like, you know what? Yeah, the rich and powerful might do some crazy abhorrent things. No woman is looking at her day being like, I'm going to tire out 25 men in a day.
That's my goal. I'm so bored that is my goal.
Just like the metric of how you measure how sex is measured, but that's
right. Well, it's such like a male version of how sex is measured, right? Like, we're not counting female orgasms here. Are we just counting male orgasms? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, at the end of the day, are they just doing blowjobs? I don't know.
Right?
Who knows?
Like, I interpreted it as, God, I might edit this out. Just say that I'm like, the way I interpret it is vaginal intercourse until male ejaculation, then we send in the next one. That was how I was reading it. That is
also how I interpret it, because Scylla says at the end, she must have insides of iron, right? Like she says something like that. So I assume that it is not oral in any capacity, that it is all vaginal.
Yeah. But even then, 25 men, that is no one's good time.
No, that's no one's good time. No. And I feel like that's one of those things that you would say about someone as like the worst possible thing you could say, right? Like, what is the worst possible thing I could say about somebody? This. She outdid a prostitute at her own job, right? Like, it's up there with like murdering or sacrificing babies. Like, that's the thing that you say about people as like the worst possible thing you could say about somebody.
There's a great, like a mock-up internet joke children's book, but it's Everyone Who Disagrees with Me is Hitler, A Child's Guide to Arguing on the Internet.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I guess for me, that brings us to her later decision of this wedding, which like, there's a lot of debate about what that meant exactly. That's hence why I also had my history book again, be like, what do they say about Messalina and this whole wedding thing? And it's anywhere from like...
It's like the lamest coup attempt ever.
Yeah. The lamest coup attempt ever. Or it's like she was in a Dionysian or a Bacchal festival with this guy, which might have had those connotations of like, yeah, you shouldn't be doing with that with someone who isn't your husband, but like wasn't a real marriage per se. But it's like, if she is so intelligent and capable of helping Claudius effectively run the empire, but she's like, yeah, I'm just gonna get married, and then like, of course Claudius will see me after I've dumped him to marry this hot guy, surely.
Yeah. Also, I got to say, no offense to that actor, but most handsome man in Rome, come on.
No, you can do better. You can do better. No, I agree. I think it's the sloppiest move. And maybe that's just like what Colin was saying. We're making worse decisions because we're not playing the game as well. But like, that has to be the worst decision ever. Of course you're not going to marry some rando. Like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have like a very public, open, hundreds of people at this wedding. And I do like the scene though, where the actor's on the wall and they're like, what do you see? And he's like, the cops. And I think they're coming in here to arrest us all.
They have swords and they're out.
That's not good.
Wait a second. Wait a minute.
Like, they just didn't consider any of the consequences of their actions, or like, let's just walk around and they
find out.
They would find out. I don't. Yeah. It seems, again, no motivation. Like, what is the actual end game?
And so this is kind of where my thinking went back then to like Livilla and Sejanus, which we didn't really talk about that outcome yet either. Where Livilla's relationship to him, it kind of to me mirrored Attia's relationship with Mark Antony a little bit.
I thought that as well.
she's very driven by love, but they portray both her and Messalina making these decisions because they're in love and they're stupid. And there's not really any consideration that these men, a little bit more Sejanus, but these men have political ambitions. And I'd also be curious to know their ages when they're engaged in these relationships with these men who are trying to get close to the emperor.
To tell because they're,
right.
We have 16, 20, 40, and 70-year-old people played by a 40-something-year-old actor.
Exactly.
It's like the CW with 30, 20-year-old teenagers in high school, but whatever.
No, exactly that, yeah.
And so it's like, I think Livia was a little hard, but I liked her a lot. And then Livilla, it's like, okay, I can kind of understand, but they're just making her more look stupid. And then Messalina was like the last straw. I'm like, no, you are literally putting so much of this on these female characters being equally smart, sex-driven, and ultimately really stupid.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't click.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it's the age-old trope of like women are too emotional, right? Like Livilla succumbed to her feelings for Sejanus to her detriment. Like if she had been more, I guess, uncaring about the situation, like things probably could have gone on as they were. And like she previously had been, she cut off her relationship with Posthumus, right? And like that she had no real feelings in. But I feel like we're playing on that old trope of like women are so emotional and like they just follow their hearts.
Or like crave sex. I mean, that argument gets rolled out in the Medea, right? That's one of Jason's levies is like, you're just upset because you're having a bad sex life right now.
Yeah. Oh, and Messalina, I feel like took that to the next level of just like, all she cares about is who she's going to have sex with next. And even when she like gets her way, she gets bored. Like I feel like they even say that, right? And so it's like she has no other needs or wants in life.
Yeah.
She's driven by emotion.
For me, it reaffirms everything I love about Attia from Rome because she had those elements. Like she loved Mark Antony. She made not always the best decisions in regard to him, but like if he crossed the line, she stood up for herself and like, she eventually moved on past him.
This leads me to another character that I want to talk about, but Mark Antony's daughter, Antonia,
who
was the most British Roman mother ever. Like, never really cared for you. It's always difficult, and you're kind of an idiot. You may kiss me now and go.
Did she like any of her children in the end?
Who knows, right?
Germanicus. Wait, was Germanicus?
Yeah,
right?
Germanicus ruled. Everybody loved him. Awesome. He was perfect, and everyone else sucked.
There's always one perfect child.
I know.
Everyone else disappoints.
Her whole suicide was so weird. And I just, okay. I mean, she was such this bridge between like the old guard and the new guard, right? Like she was one of the last remaining real old folks, I guess, even though it was the same actress, which is why it makes it kind of funky. But like, she was Mark Antony's daughter. She like grew up with these people and like this very, very old guard of Augustus and Livia and Agrippa and everybody. And to like reach this point with Claudius, I mean, it had to have been really wild. I feel like people who like span, really big changes in time, who are like born in the, 1890s and then live until the 1990s,
the 2000. Like, I mean, that's really old, but
there are people who like have spanned so much change over their generations. And I kind of feel like Antonia was that in so many ways. It was just kind of weird to see her be like, I'm done. I'm out. Goodbye.
And stop being so emotional about this, Claudius.
Right? Like,
why do you even like me? I was a very cold mother to you.
Well, it's like, is she supposed to be like the good female character? Because like, that's awful. How terrible.
I don't think there are any good female characters.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, she's like this embodiment of like a proper Roman noblewoman, right? Like all of her behaviors, her like her morals and manners. Like she toes the line. She plays by the rules. She does what she's supposed to do. And then, but we do end up with this very cold, standoffish. There's a humanism and a tenderness to her and I do at that final scene. I do kind of like her farewell speech. This sort of strained relationship she had with Claudius the whole time. I find interesting, but she plays by the rules and like, not to her benefit though. I mean, I guess it's the saying, it's like, it's a catch-22, right? Where like, they can't win, I guess. And so
Yeah, that's a good observation because we get that established right away with conversations with Julia of like, Julia feels the need to cover herself up when she's hanging out with Antonia because like she's so proper, and she never remarries, right? Like she was only ever faithful to Germanicus, at least in the show.
Drusus, yeah.
Drusus, man.
It's fine. They all have the same names.
They all have literally the same name.
You know what? I got one of the names in there somewhere. And
one of my memories from when I was in Italy, like the first time studying abroad, and we were brought to some town, there was an arch with an inscription on it, and it said like Claudius, Nero, Drusus, Germanicus, or something like that. And they're like, all right, which one's this? And I'm like, I don't fucking know. It could be like one of 4 of them. They all have the same, like, I think it ended up being Tiberius, but I genuinely don't remember. For anyone who's curious, if you look at a family tree of the Julia Claudians, it's hard to keep them straight because they all have the same 5 names.
Yes.
And they all marry each other. It doesn't help.
Yeah, they marry and remarry multiple times within the same family.
I do like they started getting a little more creative with the names. They're like, okay, we've had Agrippina, we've had Livilla. Let's just mash it together. Agrippinilla.
Right. You just keep going down, right? Because you have Livia, then you have Livilla, you have Agrippina, Agrippinilla. Like it just goes, we get the diminutives.
So the women get like fun new names and the guys just be like, just scramble it.
I mean, it gets kind of confusing, but like the general rule as I learned it is that the daughters are named after the father, right? So Mark Antony's daughter is Antonia and Livius's daughter is Livia. But then that like spins out and the naming patterns in Rome get very crazy.
Insane. Yeah. Well, they call Livilla's daughter Helen, but her name was actually like Julia Livia or Livia Julia or something like that. Or just like, oh, we can't actually say that because no one would understand.
Truly is like when you read War and Peace, there's like a part in the beginning of the book, or at least in my edition, that has the list of all the characters and all of their nicknames and various names and shortenings. And because they all, they have like their full name, they have like this name they're known by with this people, this other nickname they're also known by. And then you get someone like Britannicus or Herod. Herod is like a breath of fresh air. We're like, yes, I know Herod.
Yeah. Oh, I do actually. I want to talk about Britannicus if we have some time. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And Herod's End, because that was weird.
Oh, well, okay. That's like a whole nother thing. Let's put a pin in that.
Yeah.
Britannicus, I feel like, is again just a degradation of someone who could have earlier worked really well. But like he doesn't play the game. Again, like he doesn't want to leave or hide or do anything, suspicious or underhanded. He's just like, no, I'm just going to be here. I'm not scared of them. I'm just going to live. And that is not how you do this. That's like, we know, right, from watching the rest of this entire show. And, Britannicus saying this to Claudius at the very last episode. It's like, that's not going to work. And I don't know that just because the Sibyls said that in her weird book. You are not going to survive if you don't suspect them of killing you at every second. Like you're not playing the game right. And that was kind of fun almost to see as like here we go again. Like, we're just going to keep doing this, aren't we?
I think Tiberius says it first, but it gets paddled out a couple of times in the show of like that the fruit of the Claudian tree has 2 kinds, right? Sweet and sour. And, Britannicus is, he's like in the tradition of Germanicus and Drusus. Like there's like the good guys / Republicanists, I should say. And then the psychotic and the murderous and the power hungry and all that, or just, downright insane.
Yeah, it reminds me of a line from something else is like, may you never live long enough to see you become the villain or something like that. Like there's the young and honorable die gloriously and everyone loves them. And then everyone else lives to old age and everyone's like, oh, this person sucks.
Yeah. I mean, there is always that thing, right? Like the people that die before they ever really get to sort of, it's the potential of what could have been is the most endearing part. Like when a show gets canceled after its first season.
You know what? But this felt very complete. If that's what you're complaining about, I thought this was a very complete.
This show is done, right? Yeah. I was talking about Rome.
Okay, fair. This was wrapped up very nicely, I will say. A little weirdly, but very nicely.
But yeah, we could come back to Herod.
Yes.
Because I feel like they just used him as an excuse to talk about Jesus, which again is something that we have harped on multiple times. I'm just like, well, is he this Messiah?
Right. Is Caligula the Messiah? Is it Herod? Herod, I did look into it. Yeah, Herod's death is a little weird and suspicious, where he did die basically at, like, he went to a games or something like that, and Caesarea in Judea, and then like 3 days later he was dead. And like, yeah, maybe he was positioning himself as some kind of king or as like a god. Like, there's a bit that pops up in some historian that the crowd commented on how divine he looked. I was a little sad that like he's sort of written off the show in a way, and like, because I like him a lot as a character, because he's like, he's like Claudius's only friend.
Yeah.
And he's also this outsider into the situation, right? Because he's there in Rome as like a hostage, and you know, he's observing it all. And like, right, he comes from his own family with its own machinations, right? His grandfather murdered his father. Like, he's no stranger to the kind of the whims of monarchy, and so he's seeing it play out in this other setting. You know, I like also when Claudius gets declared emperor, Herod is the one, he's like, no, you have to go through with this, and convinces him to it. Maybe it was because Herod was working his own angle, but his role as like advisor, I liked a lot.
Yeah,
definitely.
Well, and I like that his advice to him is like, trust no one, and Claudius doesn't, even you, and like you could tell that, you know, Herod has been planning his thing. It's like, oh yeah, if it's Caligula, F that guy, I'm definitely gonna take over Judea, whatever. Yep. But like, all of a sudden, here's his best friend who is now stepping into this role, and it's like, shit, all right, well, trust no one, especially your wife, but also me, but not really me, but damn it.
Yeah. I mean, and that kind of is like, you know, that sort of hardens, or it increases the sort of pessimism and nihilism you get in Claudius of just like, you know, the game turns everybody out like this, right? Where Herod, you know, we can't have friends.
Give me those poison mushrooms.
Yes,
yeah, right. You got to eat. Sometimes you just got to eat the mushrooms.
Got to eat the mushrooms.
And now I'm thinking of Centurion again. It kills me, you guys. They should have been poisoned.
It really should have.
Oh, dear. So I don't know if there's any. Do we want to talk about Agrippina and Nero? They're just kind of there, and they're like, "Hey, find the will, burn everything."
I like when Nero goes, "Wee."
I know, me too.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite line reading.
Yeah. Well, they're there for such a short amount of time, and I feel like they're just really looking forward to the future that we're not going to see, but we kind of know of via like history,
via horrible history.
Right, first of all, boo. But yeah, I think Nero, more than anyone else in the show, is kind of leaning on the the way the character is written is leaning more on his reputation than anything else, because he's probably the most infamous Roman emperor.
Probably
between him and Caligula.
Like if you were to like ask, you know, a dozen strangers, you know, what do they know about Rome or emperors or something like that? Like, somebody inevitably is going to bring up fiddling while Rome burns or something like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Very true.
Or his name is one of the most famous.
For being terrible.
His infamy is the greatest, perhaps, of any emperor. Maybe Caligula rivals him, but yeah.
But Caligula wasn't in power as long as Nero was. So, I don't know.
But he made a horse a senator, or at least he wanted to.
He did indeed. I do love that they
That's the one I always remember.
Part of the other reason I will add that adds to Nero's infamy, and his cultural memory today is also one of the things Nero is most remembered for. Is he's like, I think, the first emperor who persecutes Christians in Rome.
I was going to bring that up as well. Yep, that, and
which
I feel
is,
like,
I think, key to this whole.
Something we always have to harp on.
So yeah, I mean, I kind of like Nero just in the idea of a guy who was very true to himself, his shitty self, but he was true. He lived true. I like that he supposedly, when he dies, he goes, "What an artist dies with me." I'm like, this guy.
Like Nero's our rock star, right? Like he's the excess of all of the things, and he just.
But he probably wasn't even that good.
Oh no, he just partied his whole life, and I do love that for him.
Do you think the guy that killed Nero, if Nero said that, the guy who killed him was like, "You're not going to believe what this dude just said"? Like, you
I hope so.
Like, you're not going to believe this.
You're not going to believe this, y'all.
The show doesn't mention it, but it's like the reason the Julio Claudians die out with Nero is like Nero pretty much offs off everyone else on the branch, on the family tree.
True that.
Doesn't help that, you know, they were very incestuous. So like there wasn't much to have to prune, but
Yeah. Isn't there a thing? There's like an incest coefficient or something like that. There's some way there's like a number value you can assign.
Yeah.
There's a number. I know there's a number for like how much of a population of a village can like how many generations they can go down before like incest inevitably happens. But
yeah,
it comes up with like the Habsburgs sometimes where it's like one of the Habsburgs, I think it's Charles II. He's like notoriously the most. He had like all of these health problems. He actually, of that family, he didn't have the highest like incest coefficient or whatever it was. There was somebody who had a higher one, and as far as we can tell, she had a relatively normal life.
Yeah. Well, and I think what is interesting is like Caligula's ailment. I've heard some people suspect it was due to some kind of injury. Like he almost drowned as a small child, I think.
Oh, maybe he had like a brain, like he was partially brain dead or something.
But then you also have, you know, those allegations that Julius Caesar suffered from epilepsy. So you can see that being an aspect. Yeah. And I mean, this is the senatorial classes have been marrying into each other for how many centuries at that point?
Longest time. Yeah.
Yeah.
We are people we do not have medical degrees speculating about people's diagnoses who lived thousands of years ago based on very circumstantial evidence. But
we are doctors, but not that kind of doctor.
not that kind of doctor.
Okay, I have like one final question. If there was no like last like characters or scenes you guys wanted to do,
hit me with it.
All right, so again, it's like what I loved about this show was how much I cared about the characters. And I read my textbook. I read Augustus all the way through to Nero. And like the number of people that are just mentioned in a sentence, and a lot of them are women, like Livia is barely mentioned at all. And I just kind of, it's like, this was a show that I would have loved if I was teaching some kind of classes like Rome in modern media, is like show this show and then actually have people read the historical records it comes from.
Well, funnily enough, one of those is the Suetonius. The translation I have is by Robert Graves. I failed to mention that.
Nice.
But I was also reading more Robert Graves, and you got things in there that you can see directly go into the show, like the phrase, like I looked it up in the Latin, but the phrase Augustus always uses about quicker than boiled asparagus is a bit that comes from Suetonius, and he says hilarious quam asparagi cocuntur, like quicker than asparagus are cooked, is like more or less what the Latin says.
Incredible.
And that exact idiom. Because there's Graves' translation, it's good as far as like a readable thing, but there is a lot of times where he will use a very like colloquial English idiom or word or something like that, and I'm like, I gotta know. Or like he'll translate a poem and put into a rhyme or something like that. And it's good. Like I can't fault the translation, but like it had me constantly jumping back to be like, what is he saying for this? Anyway, sorry, I interrupted.
No, I guess my general question is like, you know, think about how many students do we have sit in a Roman history course to learn about these names that are briefly mentioned in a single sentence versus how many people watch the show but get the most salacious, you know, not nuanced conversation of like, who are the sources? Why might they be biased? Or 100 years after these events took place. And like, I just, you know, that's kind of the question we ask about our media, right? Like how important is this for the public to be aware of the family, and like how much does that skew the understanding of Rome itself, Rome as an empire?
God,
big question.
Simple question.
I know. So simple.
I don't think it can be understated, like the effect that Robert Graves and the novelization of this history, like the effect that it had on our popular view of Roman history. I feel like so much of just standard classical, what do you think about ancient Rome, comes from this in a weird way.
Reading history, there's always the caveat of like our current times is the lens we read history through constantly. So when we look at Rome, like we see things are distorted or brought into certain relief or sharper proportion because of what we're going through now. So like in this particular time and place, like we are very sensitive maybe to the idea of tyrants or something like that. Right. You know, the political climate influences anxieties about corruption or decadence, thinking about empire.
How institutions uphold horrible leaders or former leaders.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. How the system perpetuates awfulness as a means of self-preservation, all that kind of stuff. So certain things we tend to see or not see. Yeah. I mean, it's in the study of like the history of Rome in popular media as its own thing, like independent of the study of the history of Rome. This, right, because there are these two things that lie parallel to one another. You know, they don't quite touch, but one's a sort of shadow of the other. And it's just, yeah, right, though I'm not really coming on an answer so much as just confusing myself more. But like, yeah, it's this is like
what we do.
Eli said, it can't be, its importance can't be understated. Like our popular perception of Rome, however accurate that is, so much goes back to this show. I'm going to go back and edit a lot out of what I said.
No, I mean, like the just sort of concepts of like, you know, massive luxury and corruption and incest and like this whole like bread and circuses, right? That is the huge view of this part of the Roman Empire specifically, I feel like. And I think that so much of that comes from Robert Graves. And I think I didn't really fully realize that even as like a graduate student, having read Robert Graves, but I did not watch the show. And yeah, I agree, Colin. I think what you were trying to do with your shadow hands, I think I see exactly what you mean is like the history is there. Like Robert Graves is drawing from actual like historical things, but like the novelization and maybe even romanticization of it is the part that sticks in our popular minds and like sticks
leads
with
me
us.
now to the part I was trying to say, I think, which was also the import that the show has just on media, independent of Rome, of like tropes, characters, styles. I mean, there's the direct line we can draw like to HBO's Rome and Game of Thrones, which are very much following in this model. But I think even just like these kinds of characters, political machinations, wealthy families, scheming women, all that kind of, you know, like how many Livias have existed in popular media since this show is also, I think, like a interesting idea of like how much of it kind of comes back to this. Now I think we would see a sort of, it's telling, I think, that we have a show now that's sort of a retelling from Livia's perspective.
I'm actually really excited to go into this. Yeah.
See what they're going to do with that. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, this show made me aware of women in the Julio-Claudian dynasty that had fascinating lives, even if, like, we're seeing the worst characterization of them. I know their names now. I know, like, the relationships to people. That's more than this flippin' history textbook did. So, kudos.
So yeah, I will say, like, going into Domina, I've watched season 1, and it's really looking at it from like a completely flipped perspective, and I'm so excited to see what you guys think of like the version of events that they kind of run with, because again, they follow a similar like line of its chronological history. They hit the main points.
I guess, does she murder all those people?
Different. I'm not gonna. Maybe.
So I'm wondering, like, the sort of worst example of this trend where it's like, why are we trying to resuscitate or like revitalize this character? I'm thinking of the Cruella movie, which was like, all the characters get like a feminist retelling. Is this the one we want to go with?
Why?
To be fair, Emma Stone's Cruella has an excellent line that I cannot remember, but I'm like, I have to pull it. It's like, have chaos to do or something like that. And I'm like, you know what? I like that line. I want it on a shirt, but otherwise I do not need to see this movie.
Yeah, I think there's more, to be clear, I think there's more to work with and more we can do with a Livia focused thing than a character who wants to turn puppies into a coat. But
correct.
Now I also want to show about the Gracchi brothers' mother, because
I've always wanted this.
I know, right?
Absolutely. Oh my god,
that sounds great. Sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably are maybe ripe for a time of media thinking about, you know, struggles with democracy and representational government.
100%. Yep.
All right, guys, it's time to go to Mayorkas, buy a house together somewhere.
You got 4,000 pounds I can borrow?
4,000 pounds, 4,000 euro, whatever. We write a book that gets turned into a Netflix special.
Is that the dream? Is that where we're at?
Isn't it?
Maybe guess 5 years ago. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So any other closing thoughts? I had a final question I wanted to end on, but I forget it. Oh, I think I know, unless anyone has any final points. All right. So one of my favorite questions I like to ask people sometimes is like, who's your favorite obscure character from like a popular franchise? But I want to know, who is your favorite minor character from I, Claudius?
Okay. Does Herod count? He's not quite minor enough.
He's mid-tier.
I have to find out what his name was because I forget it. Oh, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find it. whoever the guard that took over brought down Sejanus. It's John Rhys Davies.
Yes,
John Rhys Davies. But I don't. What was his character's name?
Macro.
Yeah. Okay. I was like, is that John Rhys Davies? I like couldn't even recognize him.
I guess maybe they might say it. There might have been a throwaway line, but like he just quietly disappears from the show. But I think it's implied that Caligula got rid of him.
I think so.
I mean, there's like a throwaway mention, I think, at some point of like something happened to Macro, which makes sense. The guy that would turn on his boss like that would.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that.
In a similar manner. Yeah.
I was just obsessed with his like he had this like little smile in his very like John Rhys Davies way, but it worked so well, and it was kind of really satisfying after the whole Sejanus debacle, and he really killed it in that role for me.
When Sejanus realizes he's not being promoted, he's in fact being condemned, and John Rhys Davies is there, and he does the like come here. He's like, that's what's up. Yeah,
that's Macro's my favorite. Good. That's my favorite character.
I'm gonna say I can't remember. It was the two historians that Claudius met in the library.
Pliny and Pollio, I think.
Yeah. I liked them just because they're just like, oh, everyone knows how messed up your family is.
Yes, it was Livy.
Yes.
Because he pisses Livy off by saying Livy's, what does he say? Like, he's for prose, I would rather read Livy, but for interpretation of historical facts, I'd rather read Pollio. Yep. And Livy's like, you too, man.
Yep. Yep. That's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say those.
I like how he's just kind of like, well, you know what's going on, right? And Claudius like, no, what do you mean? He's like, oh, buddy. And he gives him the very smart advice to play dumb.
Yeah.
Oh, I take it back. Okay. The copyist of the scrolls.
Oh, the elephants. We're talking about the elephants guy.
Elephants. Yeah. Oh my God.
Well, why does he want elephants? It's like, no, and there's not going to be no elephants, even though they're wonderfully drawn.
That guy, he gets the gold star from me.
Talk about screen stealing. Like he just, oh my God. So good.
That's a really good answer, actually. Mine was going to be, my favorite is Herman the German, when they make Claudius emperor and the German guards come in, and one of the soldiers calls him Herman, which is I think a funny, like, that feels like a Robert Gravesism.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
Because I don't know what the ancient equivalent of Herman the German would be, but and they're like, he's our emperor, and the guy goes, yeah. He's MVP for Colin. I hope Herman had things work out for him. I'm assuming, I know his character's name probably wasn't Herman, but
it works.
But I love it, and I know exactly who you mean. So yeah, it works.
Yeah. All right, should I wrap it up?
Let's do it.
All right. Thank you again for listening. As usual, you can follow us on moviesfordig.com and on social media at @digmovies. Blue Sky is where we hang out mostly, as well as Instagram. You can support us at Ko-fi, and you can listen to all of our episodes on most major streaming services. Please like and review. That helps us a lot. Spread our word. We will be back next episode to talk about Domina, the retelling of Livia's life story. So, see you guys. Bye.
Bye.